So there was one question on the keys that was marked wrong, so everybody got it right.
Yeah.
So that means
I
one-
don't think my grade went up though.
You didn't get that question wrong though. So that means one person made 100. Yeah.
Who is that?
I can't say who.
I need to check. I need to give some candy out.
It was Gavin. No, keep that on.
All right, so we're going to continue with chapter 5, continue with the American Revolution. So the war has started. Where was the first battle? What's the name of the town?
Did you say
Where?
where?
First battle? We'll do
Lexington.
Concord? Yep, Concord. And then Lexington.
Okay.
Who wrote that pamphlet that changed people's minds about trying to separate from Great Britain? Thomas Paine. Yep. All right, so we got the Second Continental Congress going on. And the Continental Congress will declare independence from Great Britain.
Wait, where in state is it starting from?
Huh?
Oh, see?
What?
No, it's not on her.
What?
Never mind. It's just confusing. I'm confused.
Yeah, so the Continental Congress declares independence from Great Britain. Anyone know what the date was? Huh?
1775.
The actual date. The whole date. When did we declare independence from Great Britain? That's the favorite one that everyone says. That is not correct.
I'm just joking.
It was a good guess.
July 4th is when we celebrate it.
I thought she was actually right.
It was actually July 2nd, 1776. 2 days later, all but one delegate will sign the document, the Declaration of Independence. So that's why we celebrate on July 4th, because they all signed it finally, except for one delegate. So July 2nd, 1776, you need to remember that date. Remember that whole date. So the Declaration of Independence was written by who? Only written by one person.
Oh, John.
Thomas Jefferson. I don't know.
Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson will write the Declaration of Independence. It will be revised by the Continental Congress. And the document is mostly a lengthy list of grievances against the King of England, such as allowing British troops to take over private citizens' homes and quartering troops there. That's a grievance. And of course, the defining principles.
It's full of grievances.
Yeah, it's all a bunch of grievances against the king. The defining principles of the Declaration of Independence is national sovereignty. What does national sovereignty mean?
No idea.
Independence. Or able to make their own laws.
It's the right of a nation to decide its own fate. Yeah, make their own laws. The second one, defining principles, human equality. Everybody knows what that is. The third one is natural rights. Those are those rights given to us by God that no man can take away. The fourth one is government by consent of the people. And the fifth one is the right to own property. So national sovereignty, human equality, natural rights, government by consent of the people, and right to own property. And of course, the preamble to the Declaration of Independence is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this is 1776. Of course, not everyone was considered equal under these ideas, especially in 1776. You had African slaves, they're not equal. You had something called freedmen, which are Africans from people from Africa that are not slaves. Women, they're not equal. And of course, Native Americans are not equal. But over time, this will change. Freedmen, yep. Those are people from Africa that are not slaves. Now, these men in this Continental Congress are all white, and the majority of them are landowners. So what's that make them? Rich. Yeah, rich. Now, Jefferson also said that when the government threatens its subjects' natural rights, the people have the authority, and I quote, to alter or abolish it, which means the right to revolt against one's government. It's in there. Everyone actually should go read the Declaration of Independence, because it's there.
People have the authority to,
Say it one more time.
people have the authority
To alter or abolish the government. Now, interesting enough, you're going to see other countries over history, after the Declaration of Independence is written, other countries are going to model their Declaration of Independence off of ours.
Declaration of Independence, for me, is one of the best pieces of writing I've ever seen.
It's a revolutionary document for a revolutionary statement.
You cannot help but be stirred when you read those words.
Thomas Jefferson's writing is absolutely magnificent. What he wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." That was the first time anybody had bothered to write that down.
And then you turn the clock back and think of when he was writing, how young he was, what a statement it was, given the history of the world at that point. And you feel the excitement of being on the cusp of something so profound that it's hard to put it into words.
If you review our Declaration of Independence, it has those beautiful words about all men are created equal and governments are formed among men to represent the people. It's a good statement of what we're all about. And that's the only thing people remember about the Declaration of Independence, that it was about all men are created equal. But it's really roughly a 28 count indictment against King George. And therefore, because of the way in which the British Crown treated us, we now declare that we are a free country, and we want to let you know why. Now, we're going to have a war. We're going to have a war.
In 1776, you have the Continental Congress meeting in Philadelphia, debating a unified position for the colonies with respect to the hostilities that have already broken out. And the fundamental issue between them is, are they fighting for their rights as Englishmen within the British Empire, or are they going to fight for independence? And they're seriously divided. People who are perfectly willing to resist the tyranny of the British government are not necessarily willing to strike for independence. But there's a groundswell in favor of it, I think, in large measure because they recognize that having provoked the lion this far, there's no going back.
All of a sudden, you have this group of people who are going, no, we're not part of some great chain of being with the king at the top of it. We are free people. We can vote for who we want to have in charge. And we're not going to tolerate you telling us that we have some class status we have to be trapped in. It says, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, meaning that Parliament in London, the King himself, the courts cannot interfere and take away your rights because the state can't take power from us. So even to this day, it's probably the most central difference between America and every other country in the world.
It goes well beyond what was needed in order to declare independence. It establishes a philosophical basis for a civil democracy in which all persons are guaranteed rights by virtue of their personhood.
This political genius, not just in Jefferson, but in Adams and all the other people who collected here, they saw a new time for humankind, which is that we can be free and that we can make decisions for ourselves.
All right. Let's get into the war itself. All right. African Americans will fight in this war. They estimate that some 5,000 blacks will join the militias and the Continental Army. Many were promised freedom if they fought against the British. Now, in the beginning of this war, George Washington did not want these African Americans to fight. But after the British proclaimed that if any African slave ran away from their masters and joined the British Army, they would be freed, Washington changes his mind. Now, some of these colonies will give these black soldiers emancipation. They will free them after the war, but some will not. Virginia emancipated or freed all slaves that fought against the British within their border. That happens in 1783. South Carolina and Georgia will not. They will put them back into slavery after the war.
Virginia did
Freed the men that fought against the British. Now, these black troops will fight in integrated units, meaning white and blacks will fight side by side and live side by side. This will be the last time officially that black and white soldiers fight alongside each other until the Korean War in 1950. This is 1776. It won't happen again until 1950. Native Americans, of course, will fight in this war. They have a lot to lose. Just like the French and Indian War, they had a lot to lose.
Who didn't free their men that fought?
South Carolina and Georgia. Now, with the Native Americans, it all depends on which tribe fights with who. The tribes of the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, and the Chickasaw, which are all in the southeast section of today's United States, are going to fight on the side of the British, attacking the southern colonies. Some of the tribes in the northeast, depending on which tribe, they'll fight on the American side or they'll fight on the British side. It just depends. Now, in the beginning of this war with the British, it does not go well for the Americans, not at all. British General Howe will attack New York City in the summer of 1776. Washington will try to defend the city, but eventually he will have to retreat out of New York.
How attacks who?
New York City. And New York falls to the British very quickly. This is the beginning of this war, summer of 76. Now, one thing you have to understand, wars in this time period, usually troops do not fight in the winter. Because remember, they're walking or riding horses, have wagons, and the roads are nothing but mud in the winter. So they usually encamp for the winter. You're usually not war battles going on in the winter. But in December of 1776, George Washington makes a surprise attack on Hessian soldiers.
What year?
1776. He makes a surprise attack on Hessian soldiers. Anyone know where Hessian soldiers are from? What country?
Haiti?
No. Germany. They're German mercenaries. Mercenaries are paid by a government to fight on their side. Does the United States have mercenaries today?
Did you say it was?
Mercenaries.
Yes.
Huh?
What are they?
Mercenaries are people from another country being paid by a government to fight for them.
Oh, yes. they do.
Yeah, we do. We call them contractors today. The most famous is a company called Blackwater. Yeah. Lockheed Martin makes airplanes, and they build military equipment. They don't send troops. Yeah. So these German mercenaries, Hessen soldiers, are at a place called Trenton, New Jersey. This is where Washington makes his surprise attack. That's December of 1776. After he defeats the troops in Trenton, New Jersey, Washington will then make a surprise attack on British troops at Princeton, New Jersey. He wins both battles. Morale for Washington's troops will go up. But the interesting thing is, the morale for the American troops is very low before these two attacks. And before he attacks the Hessen troops, the British, before he attacks the troops, the Hessen troops, he has to cross the Delaware River. And there's a very famous painting of Washington with his foot up on the boat, and there's a guy with a flag, and there's guys in the boat. Nah, that's not how that crossing goes. It takes days and days to get all those troops across the river. There's a great movie called The Crossing that tells you all about this and all about the battle in Trenton. Now, before crossing the river, Washington actually will read Thomas Paine's pamphlet called The American Crisis. He'll read this to his men. There's a very famous line in The American Crisis called, and it is, I quote, "These are the times that try men's souls." So he has this read to his men. Then they cross the Delaware River. They attack at Trenton. Then they go on to Princeton and defeat both the Hessens and the British. So morale goes up big time. So, since it's wintertime, the attacks on these two places is very unique. They don't have battles during the winter. That's the winter of 76, 77. Now, we're going to fast forward to the winter of 77, 78. Washington will encamp his army at a place called Valley Forge, which is in Pennsylvania. It's not far from Philadelphia. This is where he will train his army to fight as one, instead of a whole bunch of individual militias. They're going to train them to fight as an actual army of one. This is also where 2,000 of his men will die from disease because of the brutal winter. When he and his men arrive at Valley Forge, they arrive and there's already 6 inches of snow on the ground. His men will have to build wooden huts to live in. The soldiers are poorly clothed. They don't have a lot of blankets. Some of them don't even have shoes. And there's not much food. After his men deplete the hunting in the area, they're going to start eating a tasteless mixture of flour and water they call fire cake.
A fire cake?
Fire cake. It's just water and flour.
It's pretty broke.
The Continental Army will become a real fighting army at Valley Forge. Now, while Washington is at Valley Forge, a man named Benjamin Franklin is over in France, trying to get France to help us fight the British. He concludes a treaty with France, and then he goes to Spain and concludes a treaty with Spain. Franklin does, yep. Both France and Spain will now recognize us as the United States of America.
Who recognizes us?
France and Spain. And they recognize us as a separate nation from Great Britain. And both France and Spain will agree to supply military assistance against the British. So this war that starts out right here in the colonies
Yeah, I was waiting on you.
becomes not just a American
Are you
war,
looking?
but a war
You got
around the
one break,
world,
right? No, I guess the.
with France and Spain now
Yeah.
attacking the British Empire everywhere in the world. You have to remember,
What, 15
France and
through
Spain has had
whatever?
many wars with Britain before this. They don't like each other.
Okay.
They haven't liked each other in hundreds of years. So they're more than willing to, hey, let's go back to war with them. Because they're all competing to see who's gonna be the biggest empire. So the war starts out here in the colonies as a revolution, and now it's turned into a world war against the French and Spanish against the British. Now, in 1778, this war in the colonies will now shift into the southern part of the colonies. British forces will capture Savannah, Georgia. They will capture Charleston, South Carolina. And by 1780, the Continental Congress is bankrupt. And the American soldiers will not get paid. But they keep fighting. And why are they fighting? Because they're fighting for freedom against a king. The southern colonies actually had a lot of British supporters in it. And a civil war breaks out in the Carolina colony and the Georgia colony. It'll be patriots, those men who want freedom from the British Empire, against crown loyalists who want to stay with the British Empire. They will be plundering, stealing, burning, and killing each other throughout Georgia and Carolina.
That's where the Civil War breaks out, is Georgia and Carolina.
This Civil War, yeah.
Yeah.
So, hundreds of innocent civilians will be killed. Anyone ever seen the movie The Patriot? Patriot's based on a true story. Not completely, that's why it's based on a true story. It's about a guy named the Swamp Fox.
That guy.
And this is during the whole American Revolution and during the whole Civil War in Georgia and Carolina. So, it's a good movie. All right. Now, there's a lot of battles that take place in this war. We're going to watch a video here in a minute that goes through the entire American Revolution. But the final battle of the American Revolution is at a place called Yorktown, Virginia. It will be fought by more French troops than American troops. Yorktown, Virginia. The French Navy will defeat the British Navy off the coast of Virginia. Then the French Navy blockades supplies from reaching the British forces at Yorktown. In October of 1781, the British at Yorktown will surrender. Without the French, we probably would have not ever won the American Revolution.
October 1781.
October of 1781. Now, that's the last battle of the American Revolution. But to end a war, you have to sign a treaty. And that treaty is known as the Peace of Paris, also known as the Treaty of Paris. It will be signed in 1783, basically 2 years after Yorktown. This officially ends the war. And under the treaty, Britain now must recognize the United States as its own independent nation, no longer under British rule. They also must pull all their troops and all their Navy ships out of U.S. territory. So now it's the United States. The United States now controls everything east of the Mississippi River except Florida. Britain had to give back Florida to Spain, according to the treaty. So the Spanish now control Florida. The United States now controls everything east of the Mississippi River except Florida. And I've got a map, I believe. Yep. And of course, New Orleans isn't controlled by the United States. So everything in green is controlled by the United States. Everything in the yellow color is Spain, including Florida and New Orleans. And up top, you see the pink. That's the British. They control Canada. Now, somewhere between 175,000 and 200,000 U.S. soldiers will fight in this war. An estimated 17,000 will die. It's a very small number compared to other American wars that will come.
70,000 American soldiers?
175,000 to 200,000 fought in it, and 17,000 died in it. Yeah, that's very, very small numbers compared to a lot of wars we're going to talk about. And actually, I know for sure I had ancestors that fought in this war in South Carolina. It's actually a statue of one of my ancestors in South Carolina. Yeah, I'd like to go see it, but I haven't.
They died in which war?
The only war we're talking about.
That's pretty cool.
Yes, only 17,000. That's a very small number. Very small number. All right, I'm going to show you this video that talks about the entire American Revolution, all right? It's like 12 to 17 minutes long.
April 19th, 1775. 400 British regulars approached the small village of Lexington, Massachusetts. 80 men of the local militia meet them on the town green. Stand your ground, their commander shouts. Don't fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. How did it come to this? Why are these American subjects facing down their king, George III, and his empire? The rallying cry is no taxation without representation. For 10 years, the American colonists have protested the taxes levied by the British Crown. The protests are sometimes eloquent and sometimes violent. No matter the method, the Americans have no voice in the British government. Most colonists are not yet ready to break away, yet they are determined to defend their rights to assembly, free speech, trial by jury, taxation by their own representatives, and to bear arms. The controversy explodes on that April morning. Two British companies form a line of battle on the Lexington Green. A British officer orders the militia to disperse. Most of the men begin to scatter, but a few stubbornly stand their ground. A moment later, a shot rings out. Who fired that first shot, heard round the world, may never be known. The British then unleash a full volley into the militia. When the smoke clears, 8 Americans lay dead, and another 9 are wounded. In search of a rumored stockpile of American weapons, the British advance to Concord. Word of the movement spreads among the American patriots. conquered, the British find only remnants of the Patriot stockpile. The real weapons are in the hands of the militia. 300 Americans attack the British column near the Concord River. The British withdraw. The Americans pursue, and it devolves into a running battle. More militiamen, sometimes called Minutemen, arrive, using country paths to ambush their exhausted foes. British soldiers are killed or wounded continuously. Most run out of ammunition. Some consider surrendering. The British limp back into Boston, having lost nearly 300 men. Almost miraculously, the American patriots win their first battle. But the revolution has only just begun. Within weeks, Boston is surrounded by an army of New England militia. As news of the first victory spreads, other Americans take action. In May, a group of men who call themselves the Green Mountain Boys seize Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York. In June, the British attack an American position near Boston, a rise known to the locals as Bunker Hill. As the Redcoat battle lines approach, an American commander tells his men not to fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The British are slaughtered. Although the British capture the hill, American morale rises as British morale plummets. Despite these early successes, American leaders know that they will need more than an enthusiastic militia to win the conflict. The Continental Congress, in session in Philadelphia, creates the Continental Army and appoints George Washington, a member of the Virginia delegation, to lead it. Washington rushes to join the army at Cambridge, Massachusetts, telling Congress that he will need heavy artillery to drive the British out of Boston. In January, he orders Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, which advocates independence from Great Britain, to be read aloud to his soldiers in order to strengthen their resolve for the cause. Washington is aided by 25-year-old Henry Knox, who spends the winter removing cannons from Fort Ticonderoga and bringing them to Boston. Despite having to sled across frozen rivers and scale snowy mountains, Knox doesn't lose a single gun. By March of 1776, the American artillery is in place. Unwilling to suffer a bombardment or risk another attack, the British evacuate the city. Washington watches as the fleet sails away. He knows the enemy will soon return in even greater numbers. The question is where? The Patriots face enormous challenges. The British Empire wields incredible power. To win the revolution, the Americans will need foreign support. In early 1776, France begins to secretly send weapons to the colonists. But before the French will do more, the Americans need to demonstrate their determination. On July 4th, 1776, congressional delegates signed the Declaration of Independence, signaling to France that the United States of America is committed to victory and capable of achieving it. The war for independence has officially begun. Washington moves the Continental Army from Boston to New York, anticipating a British attack. By the end of June, 19,000 Patriots have joined him. And then the British return. 130 ships carrying more than 20,000 soldiers sailed into New York Harbor. One amazed American exclaims that all of London is afloat. August 22nd, the British land on Long Island, sweeping aside the American defenders at the Battle of Brooklyn. Washington skillfully retreats across Manhattan to Harlem Heights. In September, the British land on Lower Manhattan and capture the city, then dislodge the Americans from the defenses on Harlem Heights. Washington retreats again. Part of the army withdraws north to White Plains, while another occupies a strong position astride the Hudson at Forts Washington and Lee. William Howe, the British commander, defeats Washington at the Battle of White Plains on October 28th. In November, he decides to remove the threat to his rear at Forts Washington and Lee. The Battle of Fort Washington is a disaster. 3,000 Americans are overwhelmed and captured by the British assault. 4 days later, the British cross the Hudson and capture Fort Lee. Washington's army is reduced to but a few thousand men. With morale low and enlistment set to expire, he retreats across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. All that is stopping the British is the Delaware River and the coming winter. Convinced the rebels are all but defeated, the British spread out in numerous outposts throughout New Jersey. Washington must rekindle his army's confidence. He tells his men that if you will consent to stay only 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you probably never can do under any other circumstances. Thomas Paine writes a second pamphlet, The American Crisis, which circulates around campfires and steals the resolve of the patriots. On Christmas night, 1776, Washington makes good on his promise. He moves his forces across the ice-choked Delaware River. It is a desperate and dangerous maneuver, but it works. His men gather on the opposite bank, and Washington launches a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. The Battle of Trenton is a sterling American victory. Nearly 1,000 Hessians are captured, along with 6 cannons and enough supplies to outfit several American brigades. 7 days later, Washington presses his advantage, outmaneuvering the main British army and striking the garrison at Princeton. He wins another victory and captures nearly 200 British regulars. With his army rejuvenated, Washington marches to Morristown and settles in for the rest of the winter. There was almost constant skirmishing between Patriots and British foraging parties, forcing the New York City British-controlled garrison to rely on supplies brought by sea. In the spring of 1777, the British devise a plan to isolate New England from the other American colonies. 3 columns are ordered to converge on Albany, New York. 1 column is stopped at Fort Stanwix. 1 disregards the plan and instead moves toward Philadelphia, defeating an American force at the Battle of Brandywine and capturing the American capital. Washington attempts to recapture the city, but is defeated at the Battle of Germantown. Afterward, he moves his army to Valley Forge for the winter. The 3rd British column meets heavy resistance from partisan fighters, giving the Americans time to assemble a large force near Saratoga. The fighting at Saratoga rages from September to October. Victory sways the balance. Finally, the Americans surround the British army and force them to surrender. The Continental Army suffers through a brutal winter at Valley Forge, but holds together. Discipline actually improves due to the training regimen implemented by Baron von Steuben, a European officer who lends his expertise to the cause. It is one of the war's greatest displays of American determination. In the wake of the American victory at Saratoga, France signs an alliance with the United States and declares war on Britain. Threatened by the French fleet, the British abandon Philadelphia. Washington pursues them across New Jersey. On June 28th, Washington attacks a British rearguard in Monmouth, New Jersey. Although the battle is inconclusive, the winter training at Valley Forge has paid off. The Continentals had stood firm against British regulars who continued their movement to New York. Throughout 1778, Washington maintains pressure on New York City. The countryside between the armies becomes a no man's land of strides, foraging parties, and skirmishes. Unable to make headway in the Northeast, British strategists shift their focus to the southern colonies, where a guerrilla war had raged since 1775. They are banking on the support of Southern loyalists. In December, the British established a foothold by capturing Savannah, Georgia. Months later, French troops joined the Americans in an attempt to recapture Savannah, but the Allies suffer severe losses and are unable to retake the city. The Southern offensive continues into 1780. On May 12th, a British army captures Charleston, South Carolina, along with more than 5,000 American soldiers, nearly the entire American force in the South. American reinforcements rushed to the Carolinas, but they fared little better. In August, another American army is crushed at the Battle of Camden. The countryside is still involved in a vicious partisan war. Neighbors take up arms against each other. When British troops and loyalists burn homes and farms in their search for patriots, they harm the revolutionary resolve of the Southern people. In October, a force of more than 1,000 British loyalists is annihilated at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Washington sends more men to the south, where they unite with Patriot militia fighters. Daniel Morgan leads the Americans to a major victory at Cowpens, but years of campaigning forced him to retire. Nathaniel Greene takes over. In a grueling campaign in early 1781, he grinds down the British forces during a series of strategic retreats toward the Dan River. Greene is able to keep one step ahead of the British. He crosses on February 14th, and the British, without boats, are unable to pursue. The race is over. After a brief rest, Greene, now reinforced, recrosses the Dan. On March 15th, at Guilford Courthouse, Greene finally faces the British, fighting them to a bloody standstill. After Guilford, Cornwallis withdraws his battered and exhausted army toward Wilmington. Soon after, he marches north to Virginia, hoping to stop the flow of men and supplies into the southern colonies. With Cornwallis gone, Greene swiftly re-enters the Carolinas. At Eutaw Springs, though a draw, Greene inflicts enough casualties to compel a British withdrawal to Charleston, where Greene pins them for the rest of the war. Thwarted in the north and in the south, British strategists now try to attack the center. Cornwallis marches into Virginia and chases a Continental force before marching his weary army to Yorktown in July 1781, where he expects reinforcements by sea. On September 5th, the British and French fleets battle each other along the Virginia Capes. The French are victorious, and Cornwallis is cut off. A combined American and French force marches south and lays siege to the British on September 26th. On October 14th, American and French units storm two British redoubts. Cornwallis realizes that there will be no reinforcements, no escape. He surrenders. More than 8,000 soldiers, about 1/4 of all British troops in the United States, are taken prisoner. News of Yorktown reaches London in late November 1781. In February 1782, the British Parliament adopts a resolution against further prosecution of offensive warfare on the continent of North America. The final treaty of peace is signed in September 1783. After 8 years of war, the longest war ever fought in North America, the United States win their independence. The American Revolution began the most important experiment the world has ever witnessed. Can people govern themselves? Can they treat each other as equals? Can liberty produce power? So far, through many rigorous tests, America has answered yes.
All right. We have some time, so I'm gonna put it up to you. You wanna take the quiz, or you wanna wait till Thursday? Everybody wants to wait till Thursday, raise your hand.
I'll be here.
If you wanna wait till Thursday, raise your hand. If you wanna wait till Thursday.
I won't be here.
You won't be here? You can take it on Monday. All right, we'll wait till Thursday then.
Okay, needs to be looked at the way.
All right, so Thursday, that means first thing we're gonna do is take the quiz on chapter 5, and then we're gonna start chapter 6.
Will we finish it then?
No. Chapter 6 is about as long as chapter 5.
What is this chapter?
What?
What is 6 over?
The forming of the government.
What?